No, because I contacted you because I still want the documents before I sort of need it. It sounds like it's fine, really.
Okay, we'll review these.
Thank you. We're going on to consider a point of scriptude, which in effect added up what was said to be the nitrogen dioxide impacts of Port Salford, the nitrogen dioxide impacts of this proposal, and then said as a result there was something unacceptable. Remember, 15% figure. Yes. And if you apply the EP UK guidance, that produces an unacceptable result.
That's a large result, which I dispute.
Yeah, a large result. It puts you. Go with you in the Environment Agency decision document, page 65, please. That's core document 67, page 65. Which indicates what the effect of Port Salford was going to be in the agency's assessment.
Sorry, I missed the page, right?
65.
Well, to be fair, we discussed this paragraph is rather quoted from the ES. So
Yeah, it is. But quoted on the basis with regard to Port Salford, which is not apparently disputed.
Indeed.
Those increases referred to in just over halfway through, taking the most effective receptor from Port Salford, Liverpool Road, and we should note that the most effective receptor was Liverpool Road, yes?
Yes.
To the east of the M60, the concentration was predicted to increase from 45.5 to 51.2 micrograms per metre cube, yes?
Yes.
That's an increase of 5.7.
Yes.
Was that found unacceptable at that receptor?
No. When the officers reviewed the review report, they granted it permission. They had no objections on their quality grounds.
And if we're looking at this proposal and adopting an approach which borrows language from the Environment Agency with regard to nitrogen dioxide, adopting the language used at page 43, at the top of page 43, which is the concluding section on the re-evaluation of the nitrogen dioxide background data, yes? The paragraph at the top of page 43, nor to be considered at the point of highest impact assessed against what we consider to be a reasonable and representative background level, there will be an exceedance of the EU EQS. However, even if there was an existing exceedance at this point, any impact on it would be negligible.
Yes.
Is that something you agree or disagree with?
I agree with that.
And if that judgment is right, that this is negligible, the Council, in that instance, Salford, but without objection from Trafford, have found acceptable a very much more substantial increase from Port Salford. Where do you see the logic, please, in the Council's resistance of this proposal on air quality grounds?
I don't see the logic, which presumably is why the Council is not resisting it. Or underlined, and my understanding was it wasn't resisting on air quality grounds.
Thank you. But only with regard to perception, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
We then moved on to deal with permit variations, and we enjoyed a discussion about Port Talbot and what might or might not change. And you clarified some of that for us. Can you go, please, in your main proof of evidence? To paragraph 4 to 48. Which is at page 38.
Yes.
point that has been raised by the Green Clean Air Group, the possibility of future permit changes by the operator and the impact of these on air quality. And you say the group notes 3 occasions where the conditions on a permit would change, suggests that the agency appears to prioritise the wants of the operator over the needs of the area. I do not agree with the inference. I do agree that it's possible for the operator of a regulated facility to apply to the agency for changes. However, the EA must consider the impact of the requested change in much the same way as for an application for a new permit, and the variation would not be permitted if the impact on the local environment was too high.
Yes.
Is there any reason for you to change that view as to the agency's approach and therefore a proper consideration of whether there might be any variation of the permit?
There is not. And one of the occasions referred to by the second case was Port Docklands.
If the Secretary of State's guidance to us is that we should operate the planning system on the basis that the Environment Agency will do their job and can be trusted to do their job, yes?
Yes.
What basis is there, Mr. Oakham, for proceeding on the basis that perception should allow one to say that they might not?
I can see no basis for that.
You then, with regard to anxiety, have put to you a part of what Professor Bridges has said in your rebuttal appendices, Essay 5, Appendix 1. Page 14. Two points arise here. To the extent that anxiety gives rise to a health effect, is that something which would be within the remit of the HPA as the body responsible for dealing with health effects, or not? If the anxiety is giving rise to a health effect?
I suppose it would.
Yeah. And to the extent that anxiety and health effects have given rise to epidemiological studies, whose remit is it in the context of the planning system to deal with the epidemiological studies and the outcome from them?
Again, I think the HPA, possibly the health authority.
Yeah. Then let's just, Mr. Fraser quoted to you, I think, just one sentence of what Professor Bridges said on page 14. If you go to page 14 and the penultimate paragraph, do you see that?
Yes, it is apparent.
It is apparent.
Yes.
Apparent from this review, concerns about the health impacts of a new development depend upon a variety of factors. Such concerns are often fueled by misinformation from various sources that may or may not be deliberate. Commonly, health concerns are not maintained over time unless the plant, once operational, has poor performance. It may be concluded the risk perception of any environmental hazard may cause anxiety and have an impact on public health. The imperative is to focus on the objective assessment of the situation. However, concerns may be short-lived because it's triggered by media or pressure groups. Furthermore, the degree of the perception of the risk needs to be set in context. Many individuals are faced with stress at work or home. Sometimes is perceived as involuntary and can be compared to the magnitude to risk of a new development. For example, a person bullied at work with a limited chance of finding a different employment may have the same or higher levels of anxiety. Is there anything there, Mr. Oakham, based on your experience of dealing with plants of this kind, which you think is inappropriate or wrong?
I think it's correct to draw attention to the fact that anxiety tends to arise before the plant has been constructed.
Thank you. You then had put to you something that, if I say so with great respect, lacks any foundation in any evidence before the inquiry, and that is something about Professor Bridges' background and what he may previously have been involved in. As far as I'm able to see from what is before the inquiry, and these are decision letters which are included in Mr. Singleton's appendices, Professor Bridges has been involved in considering plants of this kind at Ince Marshes, yes, at Cornwall, where he's listed as one of the witnesses, and at Battlefield Enterprise Park.
Yes.
In his initial statement in your appendices to your main proof note, which is Appendix 1 of your main proof, do you have that?
I do. Yeah.
Professor Bridges set out, in essence, that he had prepared the assessment which was submitted with the application here, yes?
Yes, core document 18 submitted.
Core document
18.
18. Yes.
Yes.
And then reviews subsequent decision letters with regard to either perception or health effects, yes?
Yes.
Are you aware of any decision letter where, first of all, Professor Bridges' views with regard to health effects have been rejected by an inspector or the Secretary of State?
No.
Do you have any reason to think that Professor Bridges' summary of the perception of health effects and the way they've been handled in inquiries, as set out in his Appendix 1, is wrong?
No, I concur.
Thank you. We then need to go to the HPA's response to this application, which is core document 34. And the letter of February 2011. We've now trawled through quite a few paragraphs, and I don't simply want to trawl through them again. But a short point, first of all, is it clear or not from the letter that the HPA were aware of the existence of the AQMA?
Yes.
When we look at the HPA's conclusions with regard to health effects, are the conclusions caveated in any way, either by reference to further work with regard to the AQMA or with regard to nitrogen dioxide effects?
It's not in either of those ways, no.
Given the agency's awareness of the existence of the AQMA, and let us suppose an awareness in them of the potential for nitrogen dioxide to cause some impact on human health.
Yes.
What are we looking at, Mr. Aitken? Circumstances in which the HPA have failed to discharge their duty with regard to this proposal in advising the Inspector and Secretary of State, or circumstances in which it is clear that there is no such effect being drawn attention to?
Sorry, I lost half that question.
Have the agency failed to discharge their duty in failing to draw attention to a health effect, in your view?
No.
Or have they considered it and clearly indicated that there isn't any such?
They've considered health effect, and they concluded there is not a health effect to be concerned about.
Rubbish.
In the section of this letter which deals with the human health risk assessment,
Yes.
I've already asked you about the conclusion, but is there any caveat entered in the human health risk assessment with regard to nitrogen dioxide and the AQMA?
No.
Thank you. Nothing else on that. The next matter relates to the Health Protection Agency commissioning a further study. You recollect being asked about that.
I do.
For this, you will need the HPA's original advice, which is core document 78, and then core document 79 as well.
Yes.
I'm going to deal with the summary from the original advice first. Which is the first page of core document 78. The summary, I would think, is familiar to everybody, and I wasn't supposed to read it out. But in the light of what you've been asked about, I want to ask you perhaps two questions about it. The first paragraph, first sentence of the summary sets out what the agency has done, and then the substance of its advice. Whilst it's not possible to rule out adverse health effects from modern, well-regulated municipal waste incinerators with complete certainty, any potential damage to the health of those living close by is likely to be very small if detectable. Yes?
Yes.
Arising from that, is this proposal a modern form of, if you must call it incinerator, but a modern form of combustion plant? Don't worry about, please, the noises of. Is it a modern form of combustion plant?
It is a modern form of combustion plant, and as I mentioned earlier, in the context of what this means, it means regulated under the modern regulations.
Yes. Is there any evidence before the inquiry, whether from the Environment Agency or otherwise, that as a modern form of plant, it does not comply with the European regulations as to the best available techniques?
There is no evidence before the inquiry from the Environment Agency in that context. There is a small amount of plasma gasification, but that's not there.
But you...
Sorry, the only comments around best available technologies related to plasma gasification, which I'll address later.
The suggestion that plasma gasification technology was accepted worldwide, and you've addressed that already in your rebuttal.
Yes.
But as to the Environment Agency's view and an application of the Waste Incineration Directive, let me repeat, is there any evidence that this is not the best available technology?
There isn't, no.
As to whether it is well regulated, this proposal will be regulated by reference to a suite of European and UK regulatory guidance.
Yes.
What, please, have you been able to identify anywhere which would indicate on an objective basis that the proposal will not be well regulated?
No, I can't identify anything that suggests that.
If the proposal is modern in the sense that we've indicated, well regulated in the sense that you've indicated, to identify from the Health Protection Agency's advice, which indicates that the generality of what they say should not apply to this plant?
I don't identify anything that suggests that.
You had some questions put to you as to whether this was, as it were, a standard form of plant.
I did, yes.
Recollect
I
that?
did, yes.
A standard form of plant. But when the agency looks at a plant and considers whether or not it meets the regulatory requirement, does it, so far as you're aware, start out with some sort of pro forma or blueprint, or does it assess each proposal on its merits as to whether or not it meets the regulatory requirement?
I think probably both. In this context, the Environment Agency has clearly seen other waste combustion plants, and so has noted in respect and has a guidance note which covers that. But equally, it will assess each one on its merit as it is done here.
Has the agency indicated that this plant doesn't satisfy it with regard to any of its guidance notes?
No.
On any aspect of the proposal?
No.
Then you need to go to core document 79.
Which is a press release
It
related
is,
to the
yes,
survey.
it is one of the better core documents we've got, in as much as it consists of one page. Again, I'm going to assume a familiarity with it in light of the fact that it's been around for some time and has been referred to before, but it starts by reciting the agency's current position, yes?
It does, yes.
Then refers to the fact that it will be funding a study, yes?
Yes.
And says what the researchers will do, yes?
Yes.
And then the penultimate paragraph, HPA Chief Executive Justin McCracken said, it is important to stress that our current position on the potential health effects of well-run and regulated modern municipal waste incinerators remains valid. This is that whilst it's not possible to rule out adverse health effects from modern, well-regulated municipal waste incinerators with complete certainty, any potential damage to the health of those living close by is likely to be very small and detectable. This view is based on detailed assessments of the effects of air pollutants on health and on the fact that modern, well-managed municipal waste incinerators make only a very small contribution to the local concentrations of air pollutants. Yes?
Yes.
Then set out their current position. The last paragraph recognises that there are public concerns about the issue, and the study will provide valuable new evidence. Yes?
Yes.
Now you need to take up Mr. Singleton's appendices and the second volume of them. Go first of all to Appendix 6, please.
Okay.
Which is the Battlefield Enterprise Park decision. Yes? Go to page 27, paragraph 93. This is the inspector, Mr. Wilcock, saying, I do not accept that the HPA's decision to discuss with researchers the potential study of birth outcomes around municipal waste incinerators should be interpreted as casting doubt about the adequacy of or competency in its existing evidence base. The HPA continually seeks to review and extend the evidence base of its advice, and doing so does not diminish the weight which should properly be given to the scientific evidence currently available. Do you have any reason to disagree with Mr. Wilcock?
I don't know.
and you'll see paragraph 94, he dealt with fear in the context of knowing that the HBA were undertaking that review, and concluded paragraph 94, it seems to me these fears underestimate the efficacy of pollution controls set out in the EP, environmental permit. This limits the weight that should be given to health fears in determining this appeal.
Yes.
Yes? Next, would you go please to Mr. Singleton's Appendix 7. And on this occasion, this is Mr. Robinson at Sinfin Lane, and page 21.
We visited these before at various stages of the inquiry, Mr. Keith.
We have, and
I'm happy to rely on submissions of the view.
very well, then, if I may, it's in the light of the cross-examination, I'm going to draw your attention to, if I may, that paragraph 111. Do you see that? What the inspector said? Carrying out a review, it's for the HPA. Did the inspector accord any weight to the fact that the HPA was undertaking a review, any weight that is as undermining their current advice?
It didn't, no.
Do you have any reason to disagree with Mr. Robinson's approach?
I don't know.
You'll then need core document 76, please. The way strategy, this is a statement of government policy, which is why I'm drawing attention to it separate to the HBA material. Go, would you please, to page 77. Paragraph 22.
Yes.
Do you see what's set out there?
Yes.
I wasn't going to read it out because I'm sure the inspector is familiar with it in light of what he's just said. But in essence, does the government policy advice take any different view from the HPA?
It doesn't, no.
Has the Secretary of State modified this policy advice and said that it no longer applies for any reason?
No, I don't believe so.
Though, of course, we've had the Waste Policy Review, which is a core document, the Waste Policy Review 2010.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. You can put that to one side. You next need core document 85. This is the document, I think, without, well, for some of us, without the page numbers. Mr. Fraser is blessed with the page numbers in this instance. I think it's on page 5 as part of the introduction. What I want to draw your attention to.
Which page am I looking at?
Well, it's got, in the middle of the page, it's got the review was written by. Page 5 forward.
There's an index for the table of contents right at the beginning which shows.
Go to the introduction, chapter 1 introduction. Thanks very much.
Starts on page 9 officially.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, go to chapter 1 introduction.
Yes.
Okay. Turn over the page with the big box, page with a pie chart on it and a big box. Then there's another page what's different about this report, the approach used. Turn over to the next page. Should be a page
The review
putting
was
things in
right.
context. The review was written by.
Yes.
The review was written by, and the first entrant under the review was written by as Envirus Consulting Limited, Mark Broomfield.
It is, yes.
Is that someone we should have any familiarity with in the context of this proposal?
It is the same person, same Mark group that we mentioned previously, who now works at AEM.
So in this context, that is, this application, considering this proposal, what's your view? Has the local planning authority been advised by someone who is experienced or inexperienced in the consideration of environmental and health effects arising from waste management?
They've employed someone who's experienced in that area.
And based on that experience and having regard to what we've seen in the report to committee, is there any indication that the authority received any advice from its competent consultant that there was any health effect that they should be concerned about?
There isn't. Mr. Broomfield, might be Dr. Broomfield. Mark Broomfield asked a number of questions around the air quality health assessments, which we provided more information for, and as a result of that, he gave no such advice.
Thank you. You can put that to one side. You next need to go, please, to core document 67B again. And these questions relate to the questions that were put to you with regard to SNCR and the boiler.
Oh, right, yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
And we had an interesting review of core document 23, the boiler information, what the boiler manufacturers had said. How intimately or not is the boiler and its performance capacity and the like connected with the process and the regulation of the process?
It is instrument connected, yes.
Yeah. To what extent is that a matter which, at all, is within the remit of the Environment Agency as a process control matter?
It is entirely within the remit of the Environment Agency.
Take up core document 67B, would you please? And go to page 77. This page 77 is a continuation of a section that started on page 75, 6.2.2, oxides of nitrogen. Yes?
Yes.
And we've got tables setting out primary measures and secondary measures. Yes?
Yes.
Looking at page 77 and resisting the temptation to read it through, does it discuss both SCR, that is selective catalytic reduction, and SNCR, that is selective non-catalytic reduction?
It does, yes.
Looking at what's set out there, what's your view, Mr. Oaken, please? Have the agency considered, then, for this specific proposal, both SCR and SNCR?
They have, yes.
We see at the bottom of page 77, the applicant proposes to use SNCR and so on, yes?
Yes.
And that's set out in the context of looking to achieve the limit, yes?
Yes.
125. The following page then deals with the review of the boiler technology, yes?
It does, yes.
And at the bottom of page 75, I beg your pardon, 79, they conclude that SCR is not banked in this case, and SNCR is banked for the installation. The applicant has justified the use of ammonia as the reagent on the basis of the climate change impacts associated with the use of urea due to the higher release of nitrous oxide. Yes?
Yes.
And over the page 80, final paragraph of this section, based on the additional information provided in the figures report, reported above, we are satisfied that the proposed technology will be capable of achieving the lower nitrogen dioxide limit and is backed for the installation. Against that background, Mr. Oakham, please can you identify what basis the Secretary of State might reasonably conclude that SCR was required or was backed for this proposal?
There is no basis to assume that.
If the agency were properly discharging their responsibilities as a matter of law with regard to the Waste Incineration Directive, what should they be looking for? What would quieten public perceptions, or what would meet the regulatory requirements of WIC with regard to what is banned?
They are required to consider what would meet the regulatory requirements.
Then progressed via another tilt at Port Talbot, the same Environment Agency decision document, to a review of what the consequences of applying WID were in terms of some emissions. There was a discussion with regard to applying the 80% factor and ending up at 157, I think.
Yes, the monitoring point.
The monitoring
Yes.
point. Let's be absolutely clear about it, Mr. Oakham. The consequences of the calculation may be clear. Is there any basis for suggesting that the proposals will not meet the regulatory requirements as specified by WID and as set out by the agency?
No.
So whatever public perception there might be about the ability to discharge at a level above 125, is that something which is covered or not by the regulatory framework?
It is covered by the regulatory framework.
As to abnormal emissions, to the extent that this point engages with them, did the agency consider abnormal emissions when dealing with the permit application?
It did, yes. We provided a detailed assessment of that.
And was that detailed assessment accepted?
It was, yes.
And in terms of the permit itself, we looked at one aspect earlier, we don't need to go around it again. With regard to, for example, startup, are particular permit conditions in place or not?
They are startup, yes.
Right. Then all the excitements of the Monin Abukov length, which you were asked a number of questions about. You've explained your position, and I don't need to ask you anything further about that. But can you go, please, in the Environment Agency's decision document to page 167? Yes?
Yes.
And this is responding to comments from public interest consultants, that is Mr. Watts. The comments start at page 165. This one on page 167, the last box, is about ADMS air dispersion modelling. I won't read it out, but it ends with the agency saying that the choice of 1 metre, although inappropriate, is inconsequential for the overall conclusion.
It does, yes.
Is the agency's conclusion in that regard the same as or different from your own conclusion?
It's the same as my conclusion.
Then we need to take up core document 15B, please. And in core document 15B, do you recollect you were asked some questions about the table on page 5, responding to question 6?
I was.
I was, yeah.
Yes. I think you explained in your evidence in chief that one of the things that you've been provided with recently by the authority was some additional data with regard to Stroma Gardens and the background levels there.
I did, yes.
And explained that as a consequence of that, you had reviewed the information which had been provided.
Yes.
I only raised that point because you were criticised for the fact that this table had not previously been changed. When were you provided with the additional information with regard to Stroma Gardens?
Last week. With the initial information in September, but not sufficient to draw conclusions.
Yes. And in the not the paragraph immediately above the table, but the paragraph starting "we have rechecked."
Yes.
What's the point that's being made in that paragraph relevant to our discussion, or the discussion you had with Mr. Fraser yesterday, please?
There were 2 points of relevance. The first point is that we would not look at the diffusion tube of the A2MA and identify the diffusion tube of the M60 junction pathway, which is definitely junction 9.
Yes.
Which recorded 32. And given its relative location compared to Stroma Gardens, I felt that was an appropriate surrogate for Stroma Gardens. The second point was that while we've used the Liverpool Road tube as a surrogate for the other locations, my comment was that it's likely the concentration at the tube location is higher than at the receptors. So I was consciously taking a worst case view there.
And the information that you most recently had with regard to Stroma Gardens, does that reinforce your view with regard to the approach taken?
It reinforces my view with regard to Stroma Gardens, and indeed with my view that I was being consciously very conservative on the other sides.
Now, matters of judgment were involved here as to whether you're taking the right approach.
Yes.
Your judgment on this issue in Core Document 23, which is the February 2011 data, would have been subject to review by both the Council's Licensing and Pollution Control and by Dr. Broomfield.
It was, yes.
Have they signalled any disagreement with you in relation to these matters?
I'm sorry, in relation to which matter?
In relation to your overall view about the relevance of the monitoring data and the proper application of it?
At the time, in between this document and the CD23, the local authority suggested that 32 was not appropriate for Stroma Gardens and asked me to consider the situation if it were as high as 62, which I did, and that was the basis on which their decision was taken. So in that sense, yes, they disagreed with this point.
They disagreed with this point. You took a more robust approach as a consequence. Having taken a more robust approach, did they then disagree with your overall conclusion?
No, they didn't.
And we know you provided further information, as I think perhaps you're indicating expect to note in September 2011 in any event.
Yeah.
In terms of a dominant source with regard to nitrogen dioxide at Liverpool Road, what's your view about the dominant source?
Well, the dominant source is clearly traffic.
Yes.
And I suppose the dominant source that makes Liverpool Road different from some of the other tubes is the motorway junction itself.
Well, just take up Core Document 67B, would you, please?
Yes.
Here's page 41. This is the agency taking their view on re-evaluation 5262, the second bullet point under the table. You see that?
Yes.
Referring to Liverpool Road, this diffusion tube is located on a busy road close to the junction of the M60 and A57.
Yes.
Is that the same or a different point to the one you're making?
That's essentially the same point.
And at whatever level one ultimately decides the background is, as to the process contribution we've seen already and don't need to repeat, the agency's view was that it was negligible.
It was, yes.
And was that a view that the Council's licensing pollution control team, Dr. Broomfield, took?
I think they used the word insignificant rather than negligible, but they agree.
So, although we've enjoyed an extensive debate about the background levels, where they might be measured and what they might amount to, at the end of that debate, as between yourself, the agency, the Council and Dr. Broomfield, is there any disagreement about the assessment of impact?
There's no disagreement about the conclusion, no.
Does that, as a conclusion, stand as being relevant to other locations such as Wilfred Road? A new location raised.
Reminds me Wilfred Road is.
Wilfred Road, other side of the M60, sort of.
Oh right, yes.
Usually regulated.
Yes,
One of those roads, the name is slightly chopped off on the.
Yes, it's the road which is off the other side of the Liverpool Road, so it's not actually next door.
No.
Not on that main road, but it's close to
It's not on. It's close to the M60, not on Liverpool Road, and further away from the junction.
Yes. So that conclusion would still hold then.
Then we need to go back, please, to Court Document 150. Section 10.3 of this department's report. I dealt with air quality. You have that?
I do.
We've already referred to the HPA and environmental permit issues.
We did, yes.
Yes, and this being, as it were, an actual harm case. You said you thought that the air quality management area covered the whole borough.
It says so in 10.3.1, so that's helpful.
Sorry?
It says so in 10.3.1.
Yes. Thank you. The first part of then, section 10.3, sets out, in essence, the approach being adopted and various elements of the guidance. We referred to 10.3.13 dealing with the EP UK, the issue of judgment being involved. And 10.3.14 ends with the statement, the main difference between the parties is therefore the application of professional judgment. Yes?
Yes.
So this was an actual harm case, but an actual harm case that involved consideration of judgment. 10.3.15 identifies for us in the middle of the paragraph, many people would be affected in this densely populated area. We've referred to this already, but densely populated, you've given the maps, Mr. Simpson provides the figures. Is this area, that is the area being considered in this decision letter, comparable with the area that we're considering around the plant here?
There are significant differences, and the map
such as you might find in a densely populated urban area.
No.
The other thing referred to by the inspector was modelling uncertainties. Obviously, every model has its uncertainties. The model in this particular case appears to have been subject to more than a little degree of uncertainty. But in this instance, as to modelling any uncertainties, the background data and the like, your approach and the approach you've taken to it, is it at variance at all with the agency, the Council's licensing pollution control team or its consultants?
No.
And we've identified already from 10.3.17 that there were whole wards involved there with regard to deprivation.
We have.
Yes.
Yes.
10.3.18, the reference to not a run-of-the-mill scheme. Mr. Oakham, do you know what a run-of-the-mill scheme would look like?
No.
Okay. And as to the amount of nitrogen dioxide produced in a particular square, you've dealt with this in your rebuttal proof, yes?
Yes.
Do you think it's appropriate to compare this area in Southall with the area that we're concerned with here, in terms simply of 1 kilometre square of nitrogen dioxide emission?
I don't think that approach is valid here, so no, it's not valid to do it there.
Why isn't it valid here?
It's not valid here because the emissions from the stack are dispersed over a wide area. And therefore, considering the emissions in the 1 kilometre square which the stack happens to be located is not valid.
Thank you. You can put that to one side. Anything else about that? Yes, then finally, as far as the Council is concerned, there's the cross-examination with regard to CHP.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah. You recollect?
I do.
A lot of questions about CHP and there was all poking at the fact that there was a commercially confidential study not being produced. We know that the agency has to be satisfied, in accordance with WID, that in effect efficient use is going to be or will be reviewed to be made in the future of all sources of heat.
Yes. Yes.
And we know that that's an obligation which arises from WID. Yes. If the agency have properly discharged their obligations with regard to the WID and making appropriate use, can you identify for me, please, on what basis we should take the view that this proposal is not compliant with the regulatory requirement?
I can't see a basis to do that.
As far as the permit is concerned, we've drawn attention to the condition in the permit previously.
Yes.
You take it up, please. It's called document 67. Another copy coming.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. One of the points being made to you was, well, it's jolly difficult to retrofit this stuff if you haven't set up your itself to do it in the first place. I'm paraphrasing Mr. Fraser's much more elegant question, but you recollect the point.
I do recollect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just have a look, would you, at the permit, page 1 and paragraph 1.2.2.
Yes.
You see what this says? The operator shall provide and maintain steam and/or hot water pass-outs such that opportunities for the further use of waste heat may be capitalised upon should they become practicable. What does that mean in practical terms as to how this plant, someone's doing the building, how they've got to build it?
What it means in practice is that when the turbine itself is being designed, it must be designed with the ability to extract steam at medium pressures out of that to be used for hot water or steam uses. Whereas if you were not going to do that, if it would just be a pure power station, you wouldn't do that.
Right. So in terms of making provision for future use, is the permit taking an approach which would require the operator to go through a really very difficult process of trying to retrofit and bolt bits on, or is it taking an approach of setting it up so that if there are opportunities available, they can be relatively easy taken advantage of?
It's doing the latter, setting up such that once opportunities are there and can be taken advantage of, all that needs to happen is that various valves of change positions need to be changed and possibly some heat exchangers and pipes need to be put in, none of which is difficult.
Right. And then 1, 2, 3, review the practicability of CHP every 2 years, the results reported to the agency within 2 months. That's straightforward.
That's straightforward.
Seems pretty straightforward. And then pre-operational measures at page 12. Page 11, P002, if you beg your pardon, in table S 1.4. Prior to commencement commissioning, operations send a report to the EA containing a comprehensive review of the options available, to be comprehensive we see, for utilising the heat generated by the combustion process in order to ensure that it is recovered as far as practicable. How onerous a requirement is that to ensure recovered as far as practicable?
It is fairly onerous. It means that it needs to be clear that all possible opportunities have been looked at to demonstrate that they are, I suppose, to demonstrate if they're not being taken up, that they are not practicable.
Right. The review shall detail any identified proposals for improving the recovery and utilisation of waste heat and shall provide a timetable for their implementation.
Yes.
Grappling with the practicalities or not?
Yes, it's saying identify what you're going to do, what you can do, provide actual proposals about how you're going to get the heat there, and a timetable for doing so.
Right, thank you. Nothing else on that. Then Mr. Cunnington's questions, just 1 or 2 matters. I think the point that's being made is that we should have set out to undertake a modelling exercise with regard to traffic in order to arrive at background levels to then consider in relation to the proposal and what their impact might be, the impact the proposal might be on the background level.
I think that was part of what has been proposed, yes.
Given that we're looking at locations like Tyndall Street, do you know what the position would be in obtaining data, for example, in relation to traffic flows on Tyndall Street?
I would doubt that it is there. There would be data for the major arteries, but not for individual small roads. We know what your assessment is, but has anyone, including Dr. Holman, disagreed with your view that the traffic in relation to this proposal is an insignificant component? In terms of air quality? Yes. The answer, I think, as Dr. Holman has implicitly disagreed that the impact of traffic is insignificant.
I did ask the right in cross-examination. You may not recollect the answer. You did. No matter. others. Has anyone, apart from Dr. Holman?
No, nobody else has. No.
How reasonable or unreasonable, in your view, would it be, Mr. Aitken, to require an applicant in these circumstances, where traffic has been screened out as being significant, to undertake the sort of traffic modelling exercise and then air quality assessment arising from it?
I think that would be not would be unreasonable.
In relation to the suite of data that's already available, the terms you've identified, do you regard it as necessary in order to arrive at a proper conclusion with regard to the impacts of this proposed scheme?
No, I don't.
Was there any request from the authority in relation to the voluntarily submitted environmental statement? Any request from the authority for further monitoring information or further highways modelling information?
No.
Then, in relation to residential properties and proximity to roads, the question was put to you in relation to slip roads.
What? Yes.
Are slip roads part of the motorway or not? You don't know.
I actually don't know. I would assume they are, but I don't know whether legally they're part of the motorway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aitken. I have nothing else to ask you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, at the break I went through the list of questions I'd noted down, and I'm happy to say that they've been covered. I mean, I've asked for clarification where we've gone along, and I put some questions to you about chromium sticks, which you answered helpfully. There was just one that I wanted to ask, and it comes from paragraph 249 of your main proof. And we may have covered some detail, but I just wanted to make sure. And you say, it's referring to conversion rates of NOx to NO2.
It is, yes.
Yeah. And it's been said that I think it's been said in the permit decision document that 70% is a conservative rate, and I think we said that 59% is
I think
appropriate.
it's actually even lower than that.
Or even lower than that, yeah. And can you just say why you think the lower rate? Well, first of all, you would regard 70% as robust.
Robust and conservative, yes.
Secondly, can you explain why you consider 59%? Or even lower?
The lower number, because what's happening in this conversion is that nitrogen oxide, NO, is being converted to nitrogen dioxide, NO2, by reaction, in simple terms, by reaction with ozone in the presence of sunlight. In night time, this doesn't happen because the light goes the other way. And so for this reaction to happen, it requires time for the ozone and the nitrogen dioxide to meet effectively. It requires sunlight. And this means that a blanket 70% assumption doesn't represent those two fairly important points. One of which is, therefore, that the conversion rate is higher if you're further away from the stack because the plume has travelled further, so it's had longer for the reaction to happen. And secondly, because, as I said, the conversion only really happens during the day. The other factor to consider here is the background concentrations, by which I mean this reaction is essentially an equilibrium between going all the time with nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide in the air, and in an area where there is already high levels of nitrogen oxide, such as the area around the Salford Eccles and the area in the AQMA, there is something that's happened. There is actually less ozone available. So again, because we are going here into an area where there is relatively high levels of nitrogen dioxide, the conversion will be slower.
So it's not instantaneous, it doesn't happen immediately. There's favourable conditions for conversion are present. And is there a seasonal dimension to it? I mean, if daylight is important, then
there is a yes, in winter it would happen less because it's less because it's night time more often.
Okay, well, as I say, everything else has been covered thoroughly. So thank you very much for your evidence, Mr. Oaten. Long session, but you're now released. Okay, 12:30 now, so I think we'll take a break before we have our next witness, which is Mr. Singleton. Can we break until 1:15? Is that going to be okay? Or, yeah. Or would you like to? A little longer. Okay, make it 1:30. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, okay. Break until 1:30.